Welcome, everyone. I am super excited, but I have personal reason. But it's how often do you get to interview your dad, right? In a really kind of formal setting. But the Reverend Dr. Bruce Humphrey has just how many years, like 40 years of ministry, continues to go after retirement and still very, very involved in the denominational work, such as New Worship Communities, uh, mentoring the next generation of pastors, leading pastor cohort. Um, did two interim ministries after your retirement at the current presbytery there you're with. I know they appreciate you because you sort of kind of led those cohort. I remember you told me like, oh, they really want to like thank you with something, and you kind of turn it down. And so you're doing a lot of all this work out of uh, just a very generous mindset. I don't know. I have years of years of history with you. So I know I watch like first I have the front seat watching everything happening, good or bad, and how you lead. And you're the first one that told me that, hey, I wouldn't be surprised if you ended up going to seminary. So it's just like this whole journey, having just I'm just so grateful for you to be in my life. So thank you for being here with us. And as I said, I told Sean, my partner here, I'm like, I know him so well. I don't even know what to ask because there's going to be very few things I don't know. So Sean, I'm going to give you the floor. So welcome everybody here.
Thanks, Bruce, for spending some time with us. It was you and I were just talking offline about just everything that you've kind of done. And so it's just like, wow, you've lived this life of ministry, of doing things where many things are unexpected. You were just, in fact, just told me that you were in Alaska for a number of years. Can tell us about, because I know you were at Rancho Bernardo in the San Diego Presbytery, which was at the time one of the larger Presbyterian churches. But prior to even that, you were in Alaska, right? Serving some
Right.
churches there.
Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about that. Coming out of seminary in the 70s, I came from seminary in 78, ordained minister of word and sacrament in November of 1978, and immediately went to a mission call, living in a village for 3 years in Alaska among the Tlingit people. Learned a little bit of Tlingit language, a lot of Tlingit culture, becoming slowly bicultural and letting them impact how I understand kind of my white privilege background, understand scripture, do theology from a Native American viewpoint. Eventually ended up chaplain at what then was Sheldon Jackson College, a Native American college, and was there for 5 more years. So 8 years in Alaska, 12 years in a town in central Arizona up in the mountains, a place called Prescott, Arizona, 12 years of ministry, then 17 years in San Diego Presbytery at Rancho Bernardo. So going from a village church with an attendance of 50 people to a church Rancho Bernardo with an attendance of 1,500 people, going from a small budget of a few hundred to a few $1,000s, depending on mission dollars, up to a $5 million budget, annual budget. I mean, I've been all over the place. So when I retired, one of the things Francis knows about me is I still had a heart for the small church and the small town. There's something about community, about connection, neighbors knowing each other, all of that sanity of the local small congregation that when you have a weird acting out person or mental illness or whatever may be going on, the congregation's pretty sane. They get what's going on. They get that Aunt Susan is divorced, and when she sings her soprano solo, we all know she doesn't have the best voice in the world, but we love her, and so she stands up and glorifies God the best she can. That is not the way we looked at it in the professionalism of Rancho Bernardo. I mean, if you've got 1,500 worshipers and 5 worship services a weekend, you've got to perform at a high level. You've got to compete. I used to say, I'm not competing with the Methodist church or the Lutheran church down the street. I'm competing with the waves and the surfers. I'm competing with the youth sports programming. I'm competing with these other distractions and popular TV shows. And how do I get them out of their house to actually come to a church service and get connected in a faith community? So that's part of how I read the room and read our culture was I have to compete in the marketplace for people's time. And if I'm not competitive, they won't show up. Small churches in small towns don't have that same market competition thing that we had to face at Rancho Bernardo. So I've been all over the place, done a couple interims since I got back here to Pennsylvania, small towns, smaller churches again. So I just love using my gifts for the glory of God.
I like that whole because one of the like I've been in suburban churches, I've been in urban churches, but it's very hard to wrap my head around rural churches. You know what I mean? Like, and we have to understand that is a large demographic of what the Peace USA is in these towns in the Midwest, Iowa, and so South Dakota, where they are all by themselves out there in some ways. And it is a different world than what it is in San Diego when you're talking about La Jolla or some of these other things and how we do ministry. So let's talk a little bit. Tell me a little bit about what are the struggles and what are the gifts as we kind of touch the surface of that of like rural churches, whether it's in Alaska or in other places.
Yeah, so I'll just share a couple of my thoughts and reflections about all of this. One is that well resourced larger congregations develop a kind of professionalism that has its pluses and its minuses. I mean, there are some churches, we weren't this style, but there are churches that will hire the professional lead soprano, lead tenor, lead bass, elite music, high performance. They pay their band members, all of that kind of. It is not volunteerism based and it's not relationship based. It's really a performance. And if you're going to create a performance, those big churches have to create that sense of awe and wonder because I think that's part of what people come to church for. They come to church for community. I want to meet my friends. I want to see other people that I connect with. I want to catch up on the news. How's your family? What's going on? How can I pray for you? They want to interact in a place where they can find service opportunities. How can I serve and make the world a better place? But they also want a sense of connection to God with awe and wonder. And so large churches can do the awe and wonder. Smaller churches and rural churches have to focus more on we're a place of community and we're a place of service because we can't do the spectacular awe and wonder stuff. We have to go to how do you connect with God? Well, I connect with God because I know Aunt Susan and I know Tom, the kid that lives down the street, and I know that troubled teen that got into drug problems, and I'm befriending that person. And so much more relational and much more play to the strengths of who we are. We're small town, we're relationships, we're community, we take care of each other, and we find a service way to serve our small town to make a difference. So we have to kind of find our identity in a smaller setting. And for some churches, the identity is we run a food bank. And for other churches, the identity is we have a medical clinic where we have volunteer nurses, that we have a parish nurse that helps us with checking people's blood pressure and basics. And, so each one finds its niche and tries to figure out this is what we do best. Let's do this in the community. And if people find that we are meaningful, they want to know more about this Christ that we're serving and how God has called us to share our faith life together.
Yeah, I've really understood as I've served as an exec the value of small churches in the rural. Like we have a church in the deserts, 2.5 hours outside San Diego and Westmoreland. There's a couple thousand people, I think, Francis, that live there. But during COVID, they were the place where they had the food bank, and they talk about how they fed the vast majority of the population of that small town because they couldn't get food resources. Their infrastructure is so small there that during COVID and post COVID, the amount of resources, how much people were making, they just couldn't make ends meet. And without the church there, church was the vital resource of getting food to these people, as well as how do we help people get medical care and so forth. That the church really is that valuable asset for the community, as opposed to, as we talk about, like some of our other churches in the suburbs or whatever, they don't have that depth of the importance that it is food on people's table that we're talking about. If we didn't exist, this family wouldn't have food on their table, because there are other places where food pantries are and so forth. But the vitality of churches in rural contexts is amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I suspect that churches in small contexts sometimes fall into, why are we here? We're here to gather on Sunday morning and have a worship service. And there's a sadness in my heart, like, if that's how you're defining yourself, anybody, other churches can be doing that. You need an identity beyond that. That why are we here? We're here to gather on Sunday morning. No, we're Sunday morning is a way that we connect with each other and with God. But why do we connect with each other and God? Because we want to find who God intends us to be a blessing in this town. What's our identity of service in this community, in this town, so that we represent Jesus out on the street. We represent Jesus in the neighborhood, and we have to find that place. God, what is it that we can do to be a blessing in this community?
I also think that's something that the suburban and urban churches can learn from the rural churches, is how vital that they are, as opposed to, okay, we're open on Sundays, you can come to a Bible study and other times, but the importance that they play within the community. And sometimes we don't even know how to figure out what our place is in that community. And it's so much easier when you're in a small town and you're like, okay, this is what Aunt Shirley needs, or the people across the street need a food pantry. They need to figure out how to get rides to the big city or whatever their town is to get medical care, because otherwise, how are they going to get there? As opposed to, a lot of times, in the suburbs or in the area, that we're at such a fast pace that we don't even think about oftentimes what the needs of those around us and what we can do to impart that as a church.
You know, there's a part of suburban life, and I live in a large enough city area that I'm still kind of on the edge of farmland, but I'm also the edge of suburbia. There's a part of suburban life that is privileged enough, and the representation to me is when you have your own garage, you can pull up your driveway into your garage, close your garage door, and privilege means you can isolate yourself. You don't have to depend on your neighbor. You don't have to go knock on your neighbor and say, "Have you got a cup of sugar that I could borrow because I'm in the middle of a recipe?" You're close enough you can run to the store to go get what you need. In rural communities where you don't own the garage, where you actually park outside and you walk over to the neighbor and the dog walker goes by and you stop and visit with each other, and you know which family is having difficulties and whatever it may be, those relational neighborhood components are so essential to the gospel. The gospel spreads by contagion. It's like a virus. I have to pass it on by being close enough to other people that my life touches up against their lives, and that they catch this contagiousness of Jesus' love and making a difference in the world. And all, the gospel has to be contagious. Well, in suburban settings, we've privileged ourselves into isolation, and literally, I can sit with my computer and my screens and my TV and entertain myself, feed myself. It's almost like, why pray that prayer? Give us this day our daily bread. I don't need to pray that. I've got plenty of food in my pantry. I've got food in my refrigerator. I've got a freezer. You name it, I'm well taken care of. But what if we actually need connection in the community? What if we actually need relationship? And how do we grow those relationships? We're all trying to figure out. Universities are trying to figure it out. Banks are trying to figure it out. Institutions across our society, when we isolate ourselves into our cell phones and into our computers, how do we make real relationship connections with each other? The church has to be one of those places where we still live in relationship. So I think that's a huge thing that smaller churches have to teach the rest of us.
Yeah, so and you and I have talked about this a lot, about as EPs, we struggled with smaller churches, right? Because how do you determine that the vitality? A lot of time we think about, well, they can't self-sustain no longer financially, and it becomes a burden. So is that time to really have that, serious conversation? Perhaps you ought to think about yoking or merging and those are really tough conversation to be had. And yet I think me personally struggle with like when do I start that conversation, right? Because people would tend to say, "Well, who are you?" right? And don't you believe in a God that does miracle? And you're like, "Of course I do," right? But so those are some of the things because I know as our denomination started to lose members or just we're in that downward trend. Um, I hate for our work to become preserving something. And to me, preserving something, you have to have something worth to preserve, right? And so some of those, I struggle with that. And so I wonder if you can share a little bit, because that's my struggle. How to have conversation with small churches. They're hanging there. They're faithful people. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think part of it, Francis, you and I talk about this off and on, just the decline of our denomination and the institutional denial that my entire experience, nearly 50 years of ministry, we've been in decline. So I've watched it my entire life, and the denial that we're not reading the society, we're not reading the room, we're still maintaining, well, if you build it, they will show up. If we keep doing worship the way we've always done worship, they'll be here eventually. They'll have children, and the grandchildren will show up. You've heard me for 40 years of ministry say they're not coming back. People, we've lost them. They're not there any longer, and people just I don't want to hear it. I just want to keep going through what I know how to do. Well, we all want to feel competent. We all want to feel comfortable. We all want to know what we know and do what we do. And we knew how to do it. From in the 1950s, we were the hot item. We were the mainstream. We were influential as Presbyterians. We could brag about Eisenhower in the White House. We could brag about how many Congress people we had in Congress that were Presbyterians, and our voice was important. All of that privilege has gone away, but we haven't learned how to live without privilege yet. We haven't learned how to be desperate yet. We keep thinking if we keep the church doors open and we keep ringing the church bell in the steeple on Sunday morning and still keep gathering, whatever small group will still show up, whatever faithful, loyal, they may be in their 80s now, they may be in their 90s now, they may be dying off, we may be, all of that. But if we just keep gathering on Sunday morning, that'll be good enough. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
but that's not good enough. I don't think that's going to hold us together. So we have to figure out what does the culture need around us that we're supposed to be providing that they're not getting from us. And I think some of that is we create opportunities of service, that we declare following Jesus means we serve our world around us. And our church does this particular service project. It might be Habitat for Humanity, a food bank, you name it, whatever it is. But we recruit people from our congregation to lead in service projects. And there are people out in the world saying, I'd love to make a difference. I'd love to be helpful. I just don't know how to plug in. And we're saying to them, excuse me, we're church. That's what we do. We plug people in to service projects. We plug them into a place where your life has purpose, where you're part of something bigger than yourself. And
Mm.
then we connect them in community and say, why do we have Bible studies? We're not here to learn about the ancient Babylonians. We're here to talk about life. We use scripture to engage in what are the issues that we're facing as parents, grandparents, family members, siblings, falling out, reconciliation, bitterness, you name it, all of the life things we go through. Where do we make wisdom connections and wise counsel to each other? We share our life in community. That's church. And then finally, every so often, in wonderful moments, we experience in the midst of worship a moment of awe and wonder. And it can happen in small churches as well as big churches. It can happen in testimonies and laughter. It can happen in tears and vulnerability. Whenever that moment happens where we sense the Holy Spirit is moving among us. So we've got to read our culture, figure out what the need is, and then adapt ourselves to that marketplace that has a need, and God has called us with our resources to meet those needs. Now, here's what I think that we've made a mistake, and I'm part of the generation that made this mistake. I think we overly professionalized the ministry of word and sacrament. And we said, if you're going to be a Presbyterian, you need to know Greek and Hebrew and go to seminary, and you need your Master's of Divinity degree. And, we made all these hoops to create ordination. And I believed all of that stuff. I agreed with all of that stuff. But we have churches now that can't afford a pastor who's had to go through the entire graduate school seminary experience. Now they're hauling student loans behind them. We can't
Amen.
pay. Exactly. We can't pay pastors. So what do we rely on? Now we rely on retired pastors like me who can serve part-time, that don't have to have them paying into a pension program for me. All little churches can't afford full-time pastors. So we end up with tent makers. We end up with lay pastors. I'm big on lay pastors and on new worshiping communities because it's re-envisioning what the church could look like, that it's not mostly about the building on Sunday morning and a professional clergy person. It's a different dynamic now that doesn't rely on the clergy person. Years ago, a funny thing happened in a hospital. The doctors went on strike, and while the doctors were on strike, the patients got better. And the reason the patients got better was they said, well, if this guy isn't going to fix me, I'm going to have to learn to fix myself. I'm going to have to figure this out. I think it's kind of that way with churches. We taught churches you have to rely on your ordained clergy person who's going to bring your solutions, teach you what to do, come up with your program, bring in your youth, run all of these those days were wonderful in 1950. It doesn't exist any longer. We don't have miracle working clergy. What we have is more and more lay pastors stepping into smaller settings that can't afford full time, can't afford the pension program, etc. So we've got to start rethinking how we do ministry. And I think that model that's being created with 1001 and new worshiping communities, that's a model that we need to start looking into as a denomination because it's the hope for the future that it could look different than it looked a generation ago.
Okay, but one question I have. Then, what would motivate somebody to go to seminary anymore? I mean, why would they want it to go through all that? And so, where would be the place for those folks? Yeah. So, first of all, I have a question about what would be the motivation for people to go into ministry?
Yeah. So let me say, Francis, you are the typical ordained person of this generation, and
Mhm,
that is midlife career change people,
mhm,
primary people choosing to go to seminary because they've already had one life. They already served in their working world career for their first 20, 25 years. Now they're midlife, now they're in their 50s, and they're looking for new fulfillment. They're looking for new opportunities. They have a feeling like, I've been there, done that. I earned some money. I created my 401k. I'm doing all right financially, but this isn't fulfilling anymore. Is this all there is to life? And so I think the seminaries are watching that shift from the 20 somethings that used to come out of college and go to seminary, like me, that in their 70s we've been in ministry 50 years. That's not going to happen. That is not who seminary students are going to be, because they can't afford to do that. They
Hmm.
need to create income. They need a career. They're not going to make it financially in the clergy calling and position. But midlife people can make it. They can make it in a second career option.
Hmm.
I think that's part of where we're headed, is more and more seminarians, midlife career people, and some of those people that already have income from their first career can then look at smaller positions, part-time positions. I'm 60 years old, but I don't need full-time income. I can find other ways. Some of it is it's becoming much more of a female calling.
Hmm.
That combination of, I only need to be one of two incomes in my family, and I'm a midlife career woman that's going into ministry. So I think that that's shifting in our society. The question is, are the churches ready for that shift? Are the churches able to adapt and say, we're not going to get a 28-year-old that just came out of seminary that's going to bring our youth back? They're not out there. They're not going
Hmm.
to seminary any longer. What the new seminary graduate looks like is different.
That's
Plus,
great.
we talk about associate pastors. There aren't very many associate pastors. You used to be like you were young, you went to seminary, then you were an associate pastor for a while. Kind of like as you're getting your legs underneath you, then you went to a senior pastor position. But in West Jersey Presbytery, or now it's Presbytery for South Jersey, because they changed their name a few years ago. But when I got there, there was a gathering of pastors, of the associate pastors. There was like 10 of us, and then by the time I left 7 years later, there's only three or four of us. So as it wasn't like they left, but also the associate pastor roles dwindled within the presbytery. That there
Hmm.
were no longer, even the one position that I was in when I left, they didn't rehire the associate pastor position for me because they couldn't afford it anymore.
Hmm.
So it just kind of went away. And so
Yeah.
trying to find those full-time, even full-time pastoral positions are even hard to find these days. That we're
Yep.
going more to more to part-time positions. Like in San Diego, we're talking about how are you going to bring somebody in that isn't from San Diego to work this part-time call at this church? And the
Hmm.
reality is that you're not going to be able to. No one's going to come from New York or anywhere else to fill this part-time position in San Diego.
Hmm.
And these
So
are not unique issues. All the presbyteries I've been part of are wrestling with these kinds of things, of just more and more small churches, empty pulpits. But the cool thing as Presbyterians is, what do we have? We have teaching elders, but we also have ruling elders.
yeah,
Hmm.
Ordination call of a ruling elder is, you can step into the pulpit and share leadership on a
Hmm.
Sunday morning. You can be part of leading the service project. You can
Hmm.
be part of leading the Sunday school program. All of those things don't have to depend on professional clergy, and they should never have. It's unfortunate
Hmm.
that in our privilege, really, we got ourselves into trouble because we were too well off and too privileged, and now we're not in that same space, and we're trying to scramble and figure it out for the 21st century. But we'll get there. It's just uncomfortable and anxious for a while.
yeah, because well, I was on task force for ordination standards, and so we just did a report for GA, but a lot of it was like, how do we reset? Because the order of ministry of minister, word, and sacrament, elders, and deacons, were it wasn't meant to be a class system, but they were all supposed to be on the even playing system field. But the way that we professionalized teaching elders and ministers of word and sacrament have created disparity. And so the idea that a ruling elder becoming a commissioned ruling elder, well, did we just not purposely create a second class citizen of a minister of word and sacrament? And I heard stories over and over and over again that even though a really dedicated, able ruling elder, commission ruling elder, they're like, well, that's great, but when are we going to get a real pastor? So we created and professionalized it. We created the disparity.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And one of the things, Francis, that I had talked with you about when I was at a large, well-resourced church was dreaming of the day that this privileged, well-resourced congregation would ever think of hiring an ethnic minority person, of having a lead pastor that does not look like me, is not white like me and privileged like me. What would that look like? And I got so excited when I suddenly discovered they did it. Oh my goodness. They called an Asian American pastor who
Yeah.
doesn't come from white middle class background. So we are learning those voices of people that have lived outside privilege will become more and more significant in our denomination as we begin to understand we are not people of privilege any longer in the society. As we get sidelined, we need to start listening to the voices of people who grew up without privilege, who grew up understanding that people look at me differently and people question me because of the very texture of my skin or whatever. Those voices need to become more prominent in the new PCUSA.
So I would love to kind of hear. So you've been through all this. I guess you're the person that I know who's been see like going through the up and the down and then all the twists and turns. What would be your dream for the next generation of pastors? Or what's your dream for the next generation of Presbyterians in general, our congregations?
Um, well, the first thing is, I would say, I dream of us being less dependent on buildings and structures. That's where I think the hope of 1001 new worshiping communities is so wonderful, is that these are forming without immediately saying, okay, we need to form a congregation, then we need to have a building. Let's start our building fund. Let's lock ourselves into a mortgage. Let's get a bank loan. Now we've got to pay for the stained glass windows. I actually teasingly said a while ago in our presbytery, whenever a church leaves our presbytery, we should make them take the building with them. The building is no longer an asset. People quit thinking, oh, isn't this wonderful that we have this amazing multi-million dollar asset? I dare you to try to put it on the market and sell it. Empty churches are a dime a dozen now because that is no longer the primary value of the congregation and the primary asset of the congregation. So, freeing us up to be more creative, less building dependent. And that's where 1001 is such a wonderful future of dreaming. In my presbytery, we've launched two of our new worshiping communities, and each of them are finding one of them is an outdoor worshiping community. So in our area of Pennsylvania, it's so cold for 5 months of the year that they move indoors for those 5 months and they have creative worship styles and maintain their community. And then 7 months of the year, they're worshiping outdoors. And it's very intentional that we don't upset the ecological balance of this park. We gather in the park, we create a celebration space, we gather around scripture, we share our time together, we discuss and we pray and we listen for the Holy Spirit in the midst of the wind and the beauty around us. And when we pick up our chairs and head home, we leave the space the same way that we arrived at it, that this space belongs to God. I mean, to have a congregation that gathers like that doesn't have to pay mortgage, doesn't have to pay for plumbing bills, doesn't have to pay for electricity, that is a different way of doing ministry that I think is more hopeful in the 21st century. So that's one of my dreams of kind of where could we be going, less building dependent. Um, I also think we might explore being less Sunday morning dependent. We've had a context that says, Book of Order, we are proud of the fact that we worship decently and in order. And to be honest, what that mostly means is we Presbyterian types tend to worship from the neck up. We're very intellectual in our worship. We know when to stand up, we know when to sit down, but other than that, we don't use the rest of our body a whole lot. We're not very multisensory, we're not dance oriented, we're not wave your hands in the air oriented. I actually just watched that amazing artistic movie, the testimony of Ann Lee about the
Mm.
founding of the Shaker movement. And my wife, after watching the movie, said, "You could have almost been a Shaker," because I am very much into much more holistic experience of worship. I told a group recently that when I'm in South Africa, they insist that I have to dance with the congregation before I step up to the pulpit and I'm allowed to preach because I haven't earned my credibility yet. If you can't dance with us, we don't trust what you're going to say from your mouth or from your mind. Well, we Presbyterians don't know what to do with the rest of our body. We don't kneel, we don't bow down, we just sit and then we stand and then we sing and we have to know all the words in the hymn book or whatever it is. So I would suggest if we explore multisensory experiential worship, that's a different way of doing things. I think it's unfortunate that we gave that all away to the Orthodox Church, to the Catholic Church, bells and smells. I actually, on my own, every so often, about once every 6 weeks on Wednesday night, I attend an Orthodox Vesper service with the
Mm.
incense and the bell ringing and the icons and the incredible paintings all around the building. And just as we're worshiping together and chanting, I'm looking all, it's so multisensory. You smell it, you feel it, you stand, you kneel, all of those parts. I think we Presbyterians need to think more holistically about what an experience with God looks like that includes the whole body. So those are a couple things I would think about that 21st century Presbyterianism needs to explore rather than saying we know how to do it because we're Scots Irish and we came over here and we've always done it this way. Let's be entrepreneurial and curious and experiential, and maybe that would take us in some refreshing directions.
Awesome.
I also, by the way, I think, Francis, you know this. Sean, one of the things I do is I have a couple Native American drums. And in the spring and summertime, I go out on my back deck and I do a drum beat, a Native American drum beat, as I pray and worship. And I face toward the sunrise and then I face toward the west. And I dedicate my entire day. Lord, I want to listen to you. Holy Spirit, show me where I can serve you in today's world. And just so I integrate all kinds of other creative ways of maintaining a spiritual connection and a spiritual life. I think when I run my clergy support groups, one of our questions is, how's your spiritual life going? And one of the things we've discovered in clergy support groups is most of us are finding our Presbyterianism is not spiritually feeding us as clergy. We have to explore. I have one clergy person that attends Saturday evening rabbinic worship in a local Jewish synagogue because it's out of his tradition. I go to a Orthodox church. I have a person that goes to a Pentecostal church. We clergy types are saying, I need something different than just neck up. I need a different kind of experience. Well, interesting that we're discovering it as clergy. How are we helping our congregations discover this more holistic, curious, humble way of approaching God that explores all kinds of things? So, those are a couple of my thoughts.
Wow, that's amazing. Just kind of the multisensoriness of it. Of like, yeah, I go to other churches to feed my soul as well that aren't Presbyterians,
Yeah.
so I can just hide in the back. Nobody knows me as a pastor or anything like that, but that I can just simply worship, and I enjoy that. And I'm like, well, why don't we change our services in order to reflect that
Yeah.
whole body movement?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, they teased me when I told them in South Africa I have to dance. I'm guest preaching at that church in June. I lead a anti-racism book discussion group there. And they said, "Make us dance, Bruce. Make us dance." I said, "Okay, we'll see what we're going to do when I'm there in June."
Very
Oh,
cool.
you have anything to add, Francis? We've gone through like a whole bunch of stuff.
Oh, right. I don't have anything to add. But you always end with the question, and it's going to be a very interesting one. I know it already, so you go.
Jeez. So, Bruce, we always end, or at least we try to remember to end all our conversations with what is your comfort meal and what is your heart food?
Ooh,
So,
okay. Well, you didn't warn me to think ahead about this. So, being spontaneous, what is my comfort food? My comfort foods are anything that is sweet and sugary, anything that just makes me almost makes me recognize that I can only do health and responsible so long, and then I need this break that just Frances knows that I'm like an addict for sugar. She would sometimes tease me when we were colleagues on staff together, and she would tease me like, "You eat the most unhealthy stuff I've ever seen." And sometimes she would get after me like, "Are you eating at just a fast food place?" And so that's kind of my comfort food. What what's the second question? What feeds my heart?
yeah, what food feel is your heart language? Like,
So my heart language, I think, is exploring reading, but mostly reading that take me out of my own culture, out of my own familiar experience. It can be old 1800s culture. Right now, I'm rereading a Dickens book, Tale of Two Cities. I'm also reading Dostoevsky, Brothers Karamazov. So it can be great classic books that come from other cultures. I'm reading a Haitian novel right now that's telling a story of Haiti. I just finished reading a Ukrainian book. So anything that takes me out of middle class white American values and privilege into other experiences just feeds my heart and just takes me to a loving, humble place of curiosity. Lord, their experience is so different from mine, and I want to learn their stories and listen to these stories that have been written over the years that now I can read, and conversations like that. I'm volunteering these days about 8 to 10 hours a week at a refugee service center, international service community here in Harrisburg, and I'm working with their staff. And so I work with Ukrainian, Haiti, Afghanistan refugees. I just love that. One day a week, I'm in the offices interacting with refugees and hearing their stories. So that all feeds my heart.
wow. We appreciate your time taking some time out on today to spend some time with us. And I just want to spend more hours with you and just talking. So I need to find an excuse to get to Harrisburg.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
come visit us.
Well, thank
Uh,
you so much for joining us for this, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. Yeah,